I had rehearsed the words 100 times in my bathroom mirror. 10 years of early mornings, missed birthdays, and carrying a team that kept breaking under the weight of poor leadership. 10 years of watching the company grow bigger while my paycheck stayed exactly the same. I had given Harmon and Blake everything I had. My ideas filled their pitch decks. My strategies won their biggest contracts. My late nights kept the lights on when nothing else worked. So when I finally sat down across from my boss, Alan Harmon, I felt steady. I was not nervous. I was ready. I had my numbers printed out, revenue I had helped generate, accounts I had personally saved, cost cuts I had designed from scratch. I placed the folder on his desk calmly, and I said what I had been needing to say for years. I'd like to discuss a raise. Alan looked at the folder without touching it. Then he looked at me. Then he laughed. Not a small, surprised laugh. A deep, deliberate laugh, the kind that is meant to make you feel small. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms like he had been waiting for this moment. A raise, he repeated, like it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. The HR manager, a quiet woman named Petra, sat in the corner of the room. She would not look at me. She kept her eyes on her notepad, writing things I could not see. I noticed her pen had stopped moving. She was not writing. She was just holding it frozen. Alan leaned forward and said, "Let me be honest with you. You are replaceable. Every single thing you do here can be done by someone else, someone younger, someone cheaper, and frankly, someone a lot less difficult to manage." I had been called many things in that office over the years, but difficult was new. I had never once caused a scene. I had never pushed back loudly, never complained in front of the team, never made his life harder than it needed to be. I had just done my work, quietly, consistently, for a decade. "You should be grateful you still have a job," he said. "But since you've made it clear you don't appreciate what you have, I think it's best we part ways." Effective immediately. Petra finally looked up. Her face was tight. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. A termination notice. Already printed. Already signed. He had been planning this before I even sat down. Security walked me to my desk. His name was Kwame, and I had known him for years. He handed me a cardboard box without saying a word and stood 2 feet behind me while I packed. My coworkers stared at their screens. A few snuck looks. Nobody spoke. The office felt like the moment after a car crash, still and strange and too quiet. Only one person came close. My colleague Tun leaned in while pretending to grab something from a nearby shelf. He whispered, "You didn't deserve that. You were the only one keeping this place together." I nodded but did not answer. I could not speak without breaking, and I refused to break in that building. Alan stood at the glass wall of his office, watching. Not with guilt, with satisfaction. He watched me tuck my coffee mug and my small plan into the box, watched Kwame guide me toward the elevator, and watched the doors close. His last words were shouted across the floor, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You'll never do better than this place." I stepped into the elevator. The door shut. The floor dropped. In the silence of that small metal box, something quietly cracked open inside me. Not grief. Not shame. Something harder than both. I drove home in silence. Not because I had nothing to think about, because I had too much. The shock was not that I had been fired. The shock was that he had been so comfortable doing it. Alan had smiled. He had enjoyed it. 10 years of my work, my ideas, my energy, and he had disposed of them like a coffee cup. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I just sat there with my hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. At some point I got up, opened my laptop, and started going through my files. Old ones. Personal backups I had kept over the years, not because I planned anything, just because I was careful. Reports I had written. Strategy documents I had designed. Systems I had built from the ground up that Harmon and Blake still ran on every single day. As I read through them, something shifted in my chest. I had thought I was reviewing my past, but what I was actually reading was my future. Every document was proof of one thing Alan had been wrong about. I was not replaceable. I was the reason the place worked at all. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my adult life. I applied for jobs, updated my resume, and stared at my ceiling at 2 in the morning wondering if Alan had been right. That is what people like him do. They plant doubts so deep that even after they are gone, their voice keeps talking. I questioned everything. Maybe I had been too comfortable. Maybe I had let a decade go by without building anything of my own. Maybe I had handed the best years of my working life to a man who never even learned to say thank you. The money was tight. I had savings, but not enough to feel safe. I cut back on everything. I stopped ordering takeout. I canceled subscriptions I had forgotten I even had. I made a budget and stuck to it like my life depended on it because honestly, it did. But even in all of that, the stress, the silence, the fear, something was growing underneath. Every night I went back to those files. I read them again and again. I studied the systems I had built, the strategies that had worked, the accounts I had single-handedly rescued. I was not doing it to feel better. I was doing it to understand exactly what I had. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was eating toast and reading a trade newsletter when my phone buzzed. Felix Osei. I knew him from years earlier. He had been a client of Harmon and Blake until a dispute with Alan ended the relationship badly. Felix had always been sharp, direct, and fair. We had stayed in loose contact over the years. I heard what happened, he said. And, before you say anything, it's not sympathy. It's an opportunity. Are you free to meet? I was free. I had nothing but time. We met at a coffee shop that afternoon. Felix ran a mid-sized firm called Castlebridge Group. They operated in the same space as Harmon and Blake, consulting and operations strategy, but they had been losing ground. Their systems were outdated. Their client retention was weak. Their team was capable but lacked the infrastructure to compete at a higher level. We need someone who understands how your old company wins, Felix said, leaning forward. Because whatever they're doing, and I suspect it's mostly what you were doing, it works. And we need that here. He slid an offer across the table. Good base salary. Standard benefits. I looked at it for a moment. Then I said, I'm going to need more than that. Felix did not flinch. He put down his coffee and said, Tell me what you're thinking. I had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment without knowing it. All those late nights with my files, mapping systems I had built, they had led me here. I knew what I was worth. Not in the way people say it to comfort themselves. I knew it specifically, in numbers with evidence. I want equity, I said. Small to start, tied to performance milestones. If I hit the targets we agree on together, my stake grows. If I don't, it doesn't. You take no extra risk. But I want skin in the game. Felix studied me. I could see him weighing the numbers, calculating whether I was worth the complexity. Then I opened my folder. I walked him through how Harmon and Blake had dominated 3 key market segments: the client onboarding system, the retention model, the competitive pricing framework. All designed by me. None of it a trade secret, just strong, consistent strategic thinking. By the end, Felix was not hesitating anymore. He reached across the table and shook my hand. We have a deal, he said. They had no idea what they had just set in motion. My first month at Castlebridge was quiet on the outside and furious on the inside. I worked 12-hour days rebuilding everything from the foundation. The existing systems were not bad, they were just incomplete. Like a house with good walls, but no plumbing. I drew up a full operational map, identified the 10 biggest inefficiencies, and started fixing them one by one. Felix gave me room to work. He asked questions, but did not micromanage. He trusted the process, which made the process go faster. Within 4 months, I had rebuilt their client onboarding system from scratch. Turnaround time dropped by 30%. Client satisfaction scores, which they had been tracking loosely, started climbing. The team, who had been quiet and a little defeated when I arrived, began to move differently, with more confidence, more direction. Meanwhile, word traveled. In the consulting world, reputation moves fast. Former clients from Harmon and Blake started reaching out to me personally, not to the firm, to me. They had heard I had left. They wanted to know where I had landed. I told them, professionally, with no drama and no complaints about my former employer. Just, I'm at Castlebridge now. Let me tell you what we're building. Some of them were genuinely interested. I kept notes on every conversation. 5 months in, Alan called. I saw his name and stood still for a second. Then I answered, because I wanted to hear exactly what he would say. He was smooth at first, warm, almost friendly, as if our last conversation had happened in another lifetime. He asked how I was doing, said he had heard I was at Castlebridge, and hoped things were going well. Then, slowly, he got to it. "We've had some reshuffling since you left," he said. "A few things have been harder to manage than expected. There may be a position available. Same role, basically. Maybe a small adjustment to the compensation." A small adjustment to the compensation. "I appreciate the call, Alan," I said. There was a pause. He was waiting for more. For enthusiasm, maybe. For relief. For the part where I said yes, of course. "When do I start?" "I'm not interested," I said. "But thank you." Another pause. Longer this time. "Think about it," he said. The warmth had thinned. Something tight and anxious sat underneath his voice. I had heard it before, not from him specifically, but from people who realize they need something they cannot have. He was already losing ground, and he knew it. 3 weeks after Alan's call, I heard from Amara Diallo. She had worked at Harman and Blake for 6 years, sharp, experienced, someone I had mentored through 2 major projects. She messaged carefully at first, checking if it was okay to talk. I told her yes. What she told me was detailed. The operations team was in chaos. 2 senior managers had quit within a month of my departure. The client onboarding system I had built was breaking down because nobody knew how to maintain it. Deadlines were missed. One major account had put the relationship under review. Then Amara said something that made me sit up straight. "They're still using your frameworks, but nobody understands why they work. Just copying the steps without knowing what the steps are for. Like driving with no headlights." She paused. "I've been tracking some of it. Which clients are unhappy and why. Which processes are failing. I thought maybe you'd want to know." She was right. I did want to know. "Can you share it with me?" I asked. She could. And she did. Every piece of it was legal observation, not theft. But together it painted a picture I could use. I spent 2 weeks mapping everything Amara had shared. I cross-referenced it with my own knowledge of Harman and Blake, the weak points I had always known existed but never had reason to exploit. Accounts that stayed loyal to people rather than firms. Service gaps that had never been properly closed. Pricing structures that made clients feel tolerated rather than valued. I built what I privately called a pressure map. Not a plan for destruction, a plan for sharper, more deliberate competition. I knew exactly where Castlebridge could offer something genuinely better, and I knew which clients were most likely to welcome a real conversation. I brought it to Felix, laid it out clearly, without drama. I told him what I believed was possible if we moved precisely and professionally. Felix studied the map for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "How long will it take?" 6 months to move 3 major accounts, I said. "Maybe 4 if we execute well." He nodded. "Let's do it." We began reaching out, quietly, professionally, without a single negative word about Harman and Blake. We simply made better offers, backed by better service, delivered by someone those clients already trusted and had been loyal to for years. The pressure map was working exactly as I had drawn it. The first major account to move was Northvale Industries. They had been with Harman and Blake for 7 years, but their operations director, Kweku Asani, had always worked most closely with me. When I called him, he listened for 10 minutes and said, "Honestly, we've been waiting to see where you landed." Northvale brought a contract worth nearly double what they had been paying, partly because I redesigned the service model to match what they actually needed. When Alan found out, he did not handle it quietly. He sent an email to Kweku accusing Castlebridge of predatory tactics. He called Felix directly with vague legal threats. Then he started telling industry contacts that I was disloyal and had stolen client relationships. The story spread, but something unexpected happened. Instead of damaging me, it opened doors. Former colleagues reached out, asking what really happened. I said little. I kept working, but the picture formed itself. When people heard Alan's version and then saw how Castlebridge operated, the contrast spoke for itself. Within a month, 2 more clients had initiated conversations with us, neither prompted by me. They came because the reputation Alan was building for me was making him look worse than it was making me look. Former colleagues started coming to us one by one. Amara was first. She gave her notice at Harmon and Blake and joined Castlebridge 3 months after our first conversation. Then came Namdi, who had run the analytics team, and Priscilla, who had managed client services for years. They brought their skills, their relationships, and a deep understanding of how our competitor operated. Every person who joined made Castlebridge stronger and left Harmon and Blake with one less pillar to stand on. But growth came with weight. We were expanding faster than our infrastructure could handle. New clients meant new demands. New staff meant new management complexity. Felix and I were both running hard every day, and the cracks were starting to show. Cash flow tightened. A few client projects ran over budget. One new hire turned out to be a poor fit and had to be let go at exactly the wrong time. For 2 weeks in our 8th month, I lay awake wondering if I had pushed too fast. I had the strategy right, but strategy without execution is just a good idea on paper. We needed fuel, financial fuel, or we risked collapsing under the very success we had worked so hard to create. I told Felix honestly. He did not panic. He said, "Then let's find the fuel." The investor's name was Dunstan Abra. He had built and sold 2 firms in the same industry over 15 years and spent the last 3 looking for his next meaningful bet. A mutual contact had mentioned Castlebridge, and Dunstan had been watching us quietly for 2 months before reaching out. We met in his office. Clean and minimal, the kind of space that says its owner has nothing to prove. He asked careful questions and listened even more carefully to the answers. He was not interested in passion. He had seen enough passionate pitches. He wanted precision. I gave him precision. Metrics, trajectory, satisfaction scores, revenue per account, month-over-month growth. I showed him where we were struggling and the solutions already in motion. At the end, Dunstan said, "I'll fund the next phase. But I have conditions." He wanted a formal leadership structure. Me in a CEO track role. Not just an operational lead. A proper board. He wanted us to stop thinking like people running a turnaround and start thinking like people building something permanent. "You've been thinking like an employee," he said. "That has to stop." He was exactly right. And from that day forward it did. With Dunstan's funding behind us, everything shifted. I took a formal executive role, Chief Operating Officer first, with a clear path to CEO based on 18-month targets. Felix stepped into a chairman role, which suited him better anyway. He had always been stronger at vision than daily execution. We hired deliberately. We stopped chasing every opportunity and chose only those that fit our model precisely. Castlebridge became known for specific work done at a specific level of quality. That focus drove the next stage of growth more than anything else. Over the following year, we overtook Harmon and Blake in 2 key market segments. Their biggest remaining anchor account moved to us after a service failure I had predicted 8 months earlier. Their team kept losing people. Their proposals started arriving late, then incomplete. Then Amara brought me a piece of information that stopped me cold. "Alan's been borrowing against the business," she said. "Not a little. A lot. And he hasn't told his stakeholders." I asked how she knew. The source was reliable and the numbers were verifiable through public filings. I sat quietly for a moment. Then I asked her to send me everything. The filings told the story clearly once I knew what to look for. Harmon and Blake had been carrying debt for over a year, quietly refinancing short-term loans, using new credit to cover old obligations. The kind of financial juggling that works until it doesn't. Their revenue still looked serviceable on paper, but their actual cash position was severely compromised. Alan had told nobody. Not the minority shareholders. Not the board. He had wrapped it in careful accounting language that most people would not pause to question. But I knew that business. I had helped build its financial reporting structures. I knew exactly what the numbers were supposed to look like and what it meant when they didn't. The company was not collapsing. Not yet. But it was standing at the edge. One more bad quarter, one more major client loss, one more debt payment without cash to cover it, would push it over. For a long time, I had not wanted to think about Harmon and Blake at all. I had wanted to move forward, prove the point by succeeding. But sitting with those documents, I recognized something clearly. A door had opened, and I was exactly the right person to walk through it. I did not approach the opportunity alone. I brought it to Dunstan first, because any move this size required his buy-in and his network. He listened to everything I presented, and then sat back and was quiet for a while. "You know this could look personal," he said. "Only if it's done badly," I answered. "Done right, it's just business." He nodded slowly. Then he made 3 calls. Within 2 days, he had connected me with a small group of private investors, discreet, experienced, none of them connected to Harmon and Blake, who specialized in acquiring undervalued firms in distress. They had been watching the consulting sector for entry points. When they heard what I knew about the target, the internal structure, the client base, the real operational value underneath the debt, their interest sharpened immediately. The structure they proposed was clean. They would acquire shares gradually through a holding vehicle. The purchases would be spread over time, through different channels, so no single transaction triggered disclosure requirements. All of it legal. All of it documented. All of it quiet. My condition was simple. I would provide the strategic intelligence and the operational expertise. In exchange, I would hold a meaningful stake in whatever entity was assembled. They agreed, without hesitation. The process began. For the next 5 months, I watched from a distance. Shares changed hands quietly, through holding companies and brokered transactions that looked, on paper, like routine portfolio adjustments. None of it pointed to me. None to Castlebridge or Dunstan. The paper trail was clean, because the legal team building it had done exactly this many times before. I kept working at Castlebridge throughout those months. I hit every target on my CEO track timeline. The firm continued to grow steadily. From the outside, my life looked entirely forward-facing. New wins, new hires, new clients. Nothing about my daily routine suggested I was paying close attention to anything else. But I paid very close attention. Every week, a brief came through the investor group's council. Percentage held. Percentage remaining. Projected acquisition timeline. The numbers climbed slowly, then faster as Alan's financial situation worsened and more shareholders quietly accepted offers that solved their immediate problems. The hardest part was waiting. Not because I was impatient, but because I had to be perfect. One premature move, and Alan would find out, lawyer up, and make the acquisition hostile, expensive, and very public. So I waited, and I watched, and I let the numbers do exactly what I had designed them to do. The crossing happened on a Wednesday morning. My attorney called at 7:43 and said, simply, "We're at 55.2%. I put the phone down and sat quietly with it for a moment. 55%. Majority ownership. In the company that had fired me for asking to be paid fairly. In the building where a man had laughed at my face and told me I was replaceable. In the firm I had spent a decade helping build into something genuinely competitive before being walked out with a cardboard box and an insult. I had not done this to destroy anything. The firm still had real value, capable staff, solid client relationships, infrastructure that could recover under proper management. I did not want to burn it down. I wanted to rebuild it correctly, without Alan at the center making decisions that served his ego rather than the business. Finalization of documents took 2 more weeks. Legal review, board notification requirements, fiduciary obligations, all handled with absolute care. My name appeared in no public communication during that period. To everyone inside Harmon and Blake, the ownership shift remained a quiet mystery. An emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I made sure I was on the attendance list. The boardroom at Harmon and Blake sat on the 4th floor, a long room with a glass wall facing the main office. I had been in that room dozens of times over the years, always at the far end, presenting reports, answering questions, defending numbers I had built. I had never once sat at the head of that table. I arrived 7 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. The receptionist, a young man named Kofi who had joined 2 years earlier, looked up when I walked through the doors. His eyes went wide. He started to say something. "Good morning, Kofi," I said and kept walking. I heard the murmur die as I came through the glass doors into the main floor. Familiar faces, board members I recognized, and two attorneys I did not. Alan stood near the window with a coffee cup, mid-sentence to someone beside him. He saw me. The sentence stopped. The coffee cup lowered. His face moved through confusion, then annoyance, then something I had genuinely never seen on him before. Uncertainty. The room went fully quiet. I walked to the head of the table, set my folder down, and sat. Nobody stopped me. My attorneys were already in position. The silence held a full 10 seconds before I spoke. Alan found his voice before the meeting officially started. He moved around the table with his arms out, performing calm, the way he always did when he felt it slipping. "I'm not sure what this is," he said, with a forced laugh. "But this is a private board meeting. You don't have a seat here." I looked at him steadily. "I have 55% of the shares. I have the seat at the head of the table. Sit down, Alan." The room stayed quiet. He looked at his attorneys. One opened a folder and began reading. I watched Alan's face as the information landed. The color changed first. Then the jaw tightened. Then the eyes, which had always been confident and a little contemptuous when they landed on me, went very still. He had just been told the numbers were real. The filings were genuine. The acquisition was complete. He looked at me across the table, really looked at me, and I think for the first time in the decade I had known him, he saw me clearly. Not as a useful employee. Not as someone beneath him. Not as replaceable. He saw what I actually was. "Let's begin," I said. "I now hold 55% of this company," I said. 7 words. I had thought about this moment many times, imagined it as loud, full of drama, long speeches, the weight of everything finally released. But sitting in that room, saying those words, I felt something quieter. Steady. Like a door closing gently on a chapter that had been open too long. Alan set his coffee cup on the edge of the table. It was not quite steady. The acquisition was completed legally and in full compliance with all shareholder agreement terms. I continued. All required documentation has been filed. Majority shareholder rights are active as of this morning. His lead attorney whispered in his ear. Alan shook his head once, sharply. Then he seemed to collapse inward. Not dramatically, not with tears or shouting. Just a quiet deflation, like air going slowly out of something pumped too full for too long. Around the table, board members worked through the documents in front of them. 2 spoke in low, urgent voices. Barnabas Kwame, a board member of 11 years, looked up from his folder and gave me a single slow nod. The kind that says, "Well played." I had not finished yet. "I'd like to move to the first item of business," I said. My attorney placed a motion document at the center of the table. "I'm initiating a formal board vote to remove Alan Harmon from the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The grounds are financial mismanagement, undisclosed debt obligations, and breach of fiduciary duty to minority shareholders." The room stayed very still. Alan stood. His chair scraped hard against the floor. "This is a farce," he said, voice cracking slightly on the word. "You can't walk in here after everything, after leaving, after taking our clients, after." "Sit down, Alan," said Barnabas Kwame from the far end of the table. He was not speaking for me. He was speaking for the process. "Let the motion proceed." Alan sat down. The vote passed 4-1, with Alan casting the only vote against. The other 4 board members had spent 20 minutes reading the financial disclosures. They understood what the numbers showed, and none of them were willing to attach their names to a defense of it. When the result was announced, Alan looked at me across the table, the way a person looks when something they should have understood long ago finally becomes undeniable. He had built his career on dismissing people. Now those people held the authority to remove him. Afterward, Alan asked to speak privately. We sat in a small meeting room off the main corridor, no windows, one narrow table between us. He had removed his jacket at some point and looked noticeably smaller without it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I made a mistake. I know that now." A pause. "I treated you wrong. I treated a lot of people wrong. But what you've built, what you've done here, I underestimated you completely. I know that. And I'm asking if there's any way forward. Any role at all. Anything. I listened to all of it carefully. The deflation in his voice was genuine, and I did not enjoy it the way I might have expected to. I had thought this moment would feel like release. What it actually felt like was tiredness, the deep kind earned at the end of a very long road. "Do you remember what you said?" I asked, as security walked me out. He rubbed his forehead slowly. He remembered. "You'll never do better than this place." I let the silence sit between us for a moment. "This is what replacement looks like, Alan," I said, not cruelly but clearly and without hesitation. I stood, shook his hand, and left him there. It did not happen overnight, and I will not pretend it was clean. The first year was the hardest, rebuilding a neglected firm, steadying an anxious team, reassuring clients who needed convincing. There were weeks when the weight felt like more than one person should carry. But it came together. Slowly, then steadily, then with a momentum that felt solid because it was built on the right things, real systems, genuine care, and a team that believed in what they were building. I became CEO of Harmon and Blake 18 months later, not because I owned the shares, but because I had earned it in front of people who watched me do the hard work. We merged the best of Castlebridge into the recovered firm and created something stronger than either had been alone. 5 years after Alan left and told me I was replaceable, I sat at the head of that boardroom in the quiet fact of everything I had built. I did not win by crushing anyone. I won because when the world told me my worth was small, I went home and counted it myself. The number was much larger than anyone had admitted. Then I spent 5 years making the world agree. The plant from my old desk sat on my new windowsill. It had grown considerably.